Brilliant. Thank you. Hello and welcome. We're just going to let a few people come in. It just takes a few minutes on the webinar system. Yeah, thanks, Diana. Welcome, welcome. We've still got people coming in, so welcome all. We're just going to let everybody get logged on and we'll kick off in a minute's time. Okay. Welcome to everyone joining. Okay. Lovely. So I think we'll kick off. So we stick roughly to time. I'm sure we'll have some people joining a little bit late. And we are recording this session as well. We will discuss afterwards how it might be made available later, but I'm sure we'll be able to get it to you if anyone misses any of it at the beginning. A very warm welcome to everybody who has joined us tonight. I'm Margot, I'm the director at Amicus, and it is my great pleasure to launch our 2022 On Death Row Amicus webinar series and discussion series. We'll be exploring various themes surrounding death row with our wonderful host, Professor John York. Our first session is going to be tonight, Art on Death Row, and John will be joined by Professor Louis Zapparetto and Reverend Dr. Paul Edmondson. But before I introduce John and his guests, I wanted to take the opportunity to tell you a little bit of background about where Amicus came from and what we do. We run a 5-day training course, which John is very much involved with as well. So I'm not going to go into the details of everything about death row, other than to point you in the direction of our Insta TV series of interviews with various people who are involved with death row and about the charity, as well as our YouTube channel as well, which has all of those series of interviews on as well, which gives you a bit more depth. But I'm going to give you a bit of background about Amicus and Andrew Lee Jones. So Amicus was founded in 1992 by Jane Officer, really on the back of her outrage, having watched her friend Andrew Lee Jones's case. Andrew's case was very typical of many cases then, and sadly in many ways today. From arrest to execution, the system steeped in historic injustice was just too heavily weighed against him. So Jane met Andrew, and he was a poor Black 35-year-old convicted criminal. Jane was a white, middle-aged 55-year-old retired teacher from Birmingham in England. And they began writing through an organization called Lifelines, which still is very much involved with letter writing for people on death row today. And they'd written for 15 months, writing often, in fact, daily near the end, when Andrew's final appellant legal team asked Jane to attend his final mercy hearing, which similar to a clemency hearing today. Jane travelled to Louisiana, having never left the UK before, and attended the hearing. She was absolutely shocked by the blatant racism and explicit language that was used in court, that Andrew's trial had lacked any significant evidence, the absolutely appalling representation at trial, that the jury was an all-white jury. The trial lasted for just 1 day. His mercy hearing, like many, did not succeed. Andrew was executed and became the last person to be executed in Louisiana's electric chair. And on the night of the execution, outside in the car park of the courthouse, Jane was with Nick Trentacosta, who was Andrew's appellant attorney, not the aforementioned trial attorney, and with Andrew's family as well. And Jane just turned to Nick and said, "What can I do from England?" And Nick replied, "We need lawyers. Send us lawyers," really referring to the lack of resource that defenders had. Jane returned to the UK, started raising money with help from her friends, and the Andrew Lee Jones Fund was born in memory of her pen pal. We started off by funding three UK qualified attorneys through their final bar qualifications in the US. And those three attorneys committed to work for a year on death penalty cases in exchange for that bursary. And those three attorneys from back then are still very much involved in the field today. The organisation rebranded as Amicus in 1996 and has expanded its reach ever since. We were founded to fight for those in the US system facing a death sentence who are, for the sake of economy, history and race, the most vulnerable in society. We are a due process organisation, fair trials organisation, and we believe the greatest impact we can have and do have is in the frontline work we do, both on the ground and remotely. We provide assistance in capital cases remotely through our wonderful, wonderful pro bono volunteers and who come from our affiliate international law firms. We also train and place lawyers, postgraduate students, and to work directly and remotely on capital defender offices throughout the USA. On top of that, we publish an academic journal twice a year, which I thoroughly recommend. We conduct the training that I mentioned before, which John is involved with. And we also we are working on several empirical studies as well on a more academic level, looking at deeper constitutional issues in various key states, such as Missouri, Florida, and North Carolina. So we're involved in many areas and many levels. And part of our remit is a sort of educational, informational remit of letting people know a bit more about the death penalty and some of the issues involved. So hence our wonderful discussion series. Now, John was very kind enough to agree to host these and really conceived these sessions. So we're very excited about this. John is a long-term supporter of Amicus, having done a placement himself many moons ago. He's a professor on human rights and the director of the Centre for Human Rights at Birmingham City University. Absolute expert on death penalty, speaks on international law and very many other things during our training. But on top of that, he's a member of the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office's pro bono lawyers panel. So he's advising the British government on death penalty matters. He has also advised the European Union and the Council of Europe on death penalty issues and has presented on death penalty in the United Nations. He is a founding member of the International Academic Network of the Abolition of Capital Punishment and has also published widely on death penalty issues. And he was actually the recipient of our, one of the first recipients of our Andrew Lee Jones Scholarship, supporting people to go out and do internships in the United States. So I'm going to hand over to John. So John, I'm going to hand over to you to introduce our other speakers. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Margot. Okay, without further ado, this wonderful series was really conceived by myself, Margot, and Anna Draper, who's not here this evening, but will be here for the sessions. In the Middle Temple, in the Hall of Middle Temple, we were having lunch, and then we thought about why don't we have a wonderful series. So we wanted to begin looking at the arts, and then we're going to, in our next session, look at God, and then doctors and time. But we wanted to start with culture, because we're all embedded in the emotions and culture of life. And there are many ways in which the arts engage with the sovereign's ability to put to death. I'm really very, very excited to say that we have got two amazing speakers with us this evening. We've got Luis Arreo Zapatero. He is the Professor of Criminal Law and Director of the Institute of European and International Criminal Law at the University of Castilla de la Mancha. I got to know Luis in 2009 when he was creating the network for the abolition of the death penalty, an academic network. And Luis was building upon his amazing work that he has undertaken across Europe to reduce cruelty in punishment. And he is one of the spearheads in Europe on this process. And it's just amazing that we've got him here today. When we created the network, Luis gave us the great honor of reviewing the collection of Francesco Goya's etchings on the use of the garrote. And it's a great impacting resource that he's going to talk to us and tell us about today. But it was that art that really left an impression upon me and showed me that in Luis, he's not just a man who's got his head in the books looking at the question of the death penalty. He's someone that looks at the whole aesthetics of life. And he wanted to bring all of us who are there to see Goya's etchings. And I know we're going to hear a lot about those today. We also wanted to think of how, when we're in the Middle Temple Hall and we were going to create a series, we must have someone to speak on Shakespeare. And for me, there's no one better than Paul Edmondson. And it's just such an honor that we've got Paul with us this evening. He's the head of research of the Shakespeare Birthplace Trust. He's just a remarkable human being, really, who's helping us all to learn and to make sure that Shakespeare is part of our hearts and culture of the life of our country. But also he is a reverend, and so he's also undertaken a very important role in the spiritual life of our country, and he's another wonderful friend of ours, and we're so glad that we can have Paul with us today. How we're going to do these sessions now is that Professor Zapatero, he's going to give a presentation, and then afterwards we'll have a discussion with Paul and also with Luis about Shakespeare, and then we'll open it up for questions from the audience. If you are on Twitter, there is a hashtag in which you can use to post questions upon as well. So you can put questions in the chat room, but if you're on Twitter and you want to advertise to the wider audience that you're participating in this, you can use the hashtag Amicus on Death Row. So it's hashtag Amicus on Death Row, all one word. So wonderful. So welcome to this very hot and sticky evening. Thank you for participating with us. And we're now going to hear from Luis and his presentation. So I give the floor to Luis.
Thank you very much. I will try to make appear my presentation. I have many of them. You can see that there?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. Looks good.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for the invitation, especially the invitation from John York to take part in this series of Amicus on Death Row. Despite the invitation, despite my miserable knowledge of English, I beg your pardon. I am an old Spaniard that only speak French and German. I came too late in the discovering of English, exactly as with the new technologies. I come in time for the Facebook, but too late for the Twitter. Well, as you know, I am not an historian, nor an expert in the arts, but I have approached painting in search of representations of the death penalty and the signification of its cruelty. I am just a criminal lawyer. There are more than a few pictorial testimonials of capital executions. There are more prior to the end of the Middle Ages. They are found in early engravings and in the miniatures that illuminated the manuscripts before Gutenberg. It is obvious that there are artistic expressions on death penalty that are different from painting. especially amongst the most modern of the art, such as filmography, or in literature that is more classical, which is also an art, as we will see after my presentation. As we will see later, but I deal only with painting. I also left out on my musings the so-called religious painting, because the emotion that I am personally looking for is the civic emotion, the emotion as citizens, the emotion that is contrary to the cruel acts, contrary to the humanity, torture, and cruel and inhuman punishment, including naturally death penalty. I deal with painting because it is the most traditional instrument for transmitting emotions. And I have come to the conclusion that the problem posed by the death penalty is not a problem of common sense, that is, of logical and argumentation sense, that for me is clear, but of sense and sensibility. Remembering the film from Susan Sarandon. I believe that once the progress of abolition has been achieved in much of the world, the continuity of that abolition process requires that we transmit the emotion of the cruelty of capital punishment as the deep feeling of wounded human dignity. Artists have approached capital punishment in two ways. At first, descriptively, objectively, not taking sides. That was the case with the first approach that we are going to see. But there is an evolution among the modern that we could call no partisan. We find, for example, Andy Warhol, who with his electric chair could count as no partisan. The first artist to display, this is a gift from Roger Hood that he will like to comment for a book that we are preparing. The book is not ready, and our Roger Hood is also not ready. But I put that as remembering of our friendship with John Onhe. The first artist to display his ability to describe the death penalty in all its objectivity is the French draftsman and engraver Jacques Callot, who lived between 1592 and 1635, although he died very young. He produced engravings on a variety of characters, poor people, soldiers, and princes. He composed a large collection of 18 engravings entitled The Great Miseries of War. There are diverse scenes of military themes, from soldiers resting under a tree, and also soldiers resting under a great tree as a place of mass execution. You can see that here. In one of the sheets, we can see the main square of a city where torture and execution on the wheel are depicted, and then hanging and also shooting. This view is very impressive. The details also, and that is the shooting. The caption on the plate seems to warn citizens of the risk of committing crimes, but Calot himself does not seem to believe in the dissuasive effect of death penalty, since in the corner of the drawing and engravings, some play dice and others kill and rape, while in the center, the executed are in full view. The next painter engraver is a Londoner, William Hogarth. Among his wide-ranging oeuvre, he composed works on modern moral subjects, depicting disreputable lives with great satirical force. That is precisely what makes him valuable as a social critic. The first engraving that I present is a very significant piece depicting the punishment of those responsible for a great financial fraud called the South Sea Scheme. It resulted in a disastrous market crash with rebellion from people. Like in 1929 or 2007. And you can see here at the place where one spill Scots, the other take the life of others, and the other was submitted to this torture. Here is the system. Well, this Hogarth make a whole series on cruelty. He expressed that the criminal, but equally that of the judges who sentenced them to death, and constitutes a moral presentation of the social origin of criminal life. The first scene are junks that tortured dogs. When some years after that, the same young beat a horse who is fast death of work fatigue. In the third, the adult had become a murder of a young girl. And the fourth, he has already been executed. His neck is still roped, and he is subjected to a terrible forensic type action, an autopsy, with all the judges flying over the scene. The images denounce cruelty while maintaining an almost perfect realism in the representation of human figures and their action. Following on is Alessandro Magnasco, an Italian who composed scenes of everyday life, landscapes, and religious subjects, but he devotes specific attention to criminal matters. The first painting is called Interrogations in Jail, the submission to an interrogation under torture, a matter not exclusive to the Spanish Inquisition, but of the entire criminal justice system of the 16th and 17th centuries all over Europe. A prisoner is seen hanging by his hands, tied behind his back. We can easily imagine the painful effects. To the left, here are several characters chained to the walls, and to the right. We can see that now. It's lost also. In two other paintings, he deals with the worst treated prisoners in history, the galley slaves. They were usually people sentenced to death, whose penalty was replaced by that of serving in the galleys for periods of around 10 years. They live no more. The first of the painting on this subject is called The Arrival and Interrogation of the Galley Slaves to the Prison of Genoa. Here is the scene, and here is in the details: the hanging man, the chains, and the other waiting for torture. This is an image from Goya. The torture was universal and the same in each country. Todorov, the specialist, the French specialist in the Enlightenment, says that these images are exceptional in the history of painting, in that we cannot remain insensitive to the suffering of these men, not even if they were indeed guilty of any crime. I should mention also Tiepolo, who, with his Polichinelle, he make also one of a hanging, and then he denounces the conversion of the humanity in puppets. But we have to move to Goya. First of all, some words about the painter. Goya was born in 1746 and had come to occupy the venerable post of court painter, König painter, by the magic and complicated year of 1789, and had established a circle of relation in which open and illustrated through predominated. As well as novels and bullfighters, he painted the portrait of politicians and men and women, of letters with whom he had close relations. When Goya illustrated a group of engravers, Disaster of War, between 1810 and 14, he was already a mature man, a distinguished painter of kings, princes, and the whole court. He was, like his friends, skeptical with regard to the monarchy and liberal with regard to the government and society. His acute deafness had soured his character. The other group of engravers, the Caprichos, is a work that criticizes and censures custom, superstition in religious life, and the abusive exploitation of the people by the clergy and the church. The ignorance of many clerics and professionals, the machismo, and the subjection of women. Goya was not an intellectual in the strictest sense of the word, as he did not dedicate himself to study and to reflection on the social problems. He is without a doubt, though, in the sense of the enlightened artist, inspired by the ideas of the Enlightenment that reached from the cultivated social class for which he worked, and with which he had relations and on occasion friendship. His work reflects the enlightened ideas on the most relevant questions of his time and on the greatest civilization treasure of the Enlightenment. Its debate and criticism of arbitrary definitions of crimes, the cruelty of punishment, and the way justice was meted out by the ancient regime. As is well known, everything had been masterfully summed up by a qualified member of the group in Milan, led by the brothers Verri and the Marquis of Beccaria, with the book on crimes and punishment and the other book on torture. Naturally, the Inquisition noted down everything that moved in Spain, and the repression stifled new ideas. for example, discovering the motion of the earth, to be liberal. The Inquisition was not only a generic, abstract political and religious fact, but it also affected everybody, especially those who expressed themselves in writing on questions about which the Holy Office was sensitive, and those who expressed themselves through painting and other images. Goya himself, facing or was threatened with inquisitorial proceedings. Goya himself saw himself facing or was threatened with inquisitorial proceedings. The Caprichos put on sale to the public with great success, caught the attention of the Inquisition. 2 times was called Goya from Inquisition. The first time for the Caprichos, and later on 1815, he was called to pronounce on the nude and the clothed Maya. Goya included actings in the exemplary copy of the Disasters, with a preparatory drawing that showed the profile of a prisoner in letters, in fetters, seated in a painful posture that became the subject of 3 pieces. The legend that the same Goya wrote is, if he is a criminal, he should die soon. The custody of a criminal does not call for torture. Torture was abolished in 1811. An article 303 of the Constitution proclaimed that neither torture nor duties will be used. The better known painter from Goya is maybe this one, the shooting of the 3rd of May, as began the Independence War. His first picture of a garroting nevertheless dates back to an early point in time, 1778. A drawing and etching in which Goya captured the brutal form of death that he would portray more widely in the Disasters of the war, as we will see. At the end of his life, Goya is exiled himself in Bordeaux, in France. And in the squares of Bordeaux, he finds the forms of execution by guillotine that he describes only one time on the engravings that he called the French punishment. The queen of punishment has always been death, and even in Goya's day, people were executed by steel, fire, and most common, the hangman's nose. However, hanging produced an iniquitous physiology that made many people in our world meditate, and that has led to the search for means and methods of execution that are not so cruel and are less of an indignity for the prisoners and their families. Each country developed its own invention. In France, what Goya called the French punishment, the guillotine, and in Spain and his American territories at the time, the garrote. Half a century after our story here, the enterprising American of the United States sought out the most humane execution again, electrocution, the gas chamber, and at the end, the lethal injection. Modern technologies for an old pharmacopoeia. In year 1812 was abolished from the courts, from the parliament, the hanging, the punish as hanging, and only established as death penalty the garrote. And here I will show you some scenes from Goya without comment by from himself. And also I think that John York put in your paper the digital address of my book about it, with photos and so on. This is a only one, because what a crime. And Goya writes, because a knife, for a knife, he had a knife, and that was suspicious for French occupants. Before was only one, here there are 8. And Goya said, and we cannot see or know why. The public is always there. And this is the first representation in the history of the witness of an execution, with all the characteristics of the people of this time. In the disasters of the war, the hangings and other executions are many, with all its cruelty. And to finish my presentation, I would like to mention somebody that I don't find death penalty things in him. It's William Blake. Despite had a very nice depictions of the hell from Dante, from the history of the Decameron. But I can finish with him because he made something very important also. We can support today the slaves. We don't support the unequal treatment of the women and men, and hopefully the cruel treatments from people that is under the justice hands. But in this time from Goya, also William Blake make a very important work, pictorial work, who he called Visions of the Daughters of Albion, a reivindication of the equality of men and women. That is a very local form, hopefully, to finish my presentation. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Luis. That was wonderful. Margot, because of time, I was wondering if we should just go straight to Paul, and then we can just do a Q&A. I've got some questions that I'd like to put to Luis and Paul, and then we can open up to the audience. Is that okay?
Sorry, muting. Yes, that's fine. Good idea.
Brilliant. Thank you. Okay. Thank you very much, Luis. Okay, Paul, if you're there, you have the floor, or you have the online platform.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Thank you for inviting me along to speak. Well, we've just seen lots of representations, lots of depictions of the death penalty in action, and Shakespeare's interest is not dissimilar to Goya's. but he's a master of empathy as a great dramatist and creative writer. And the death penalty, the death sentence, spreads across his work. I mean, at a rough calculation, certainly it can be said that all the history plays, and there are 10 of them, if we count them along the lines of their first printing, first gathering together in the first folio of 1623, 10 history plays, and eight other plays that the death penalty features in. Hamlet, Macbeth, Titus Andronicus, The Winter's Tale, The Comedy of Errors, King Lear, Measure for Measure. So it was very prevalent, of course, in the culture of his time, and it loomed large for him. There was not least the martyrdom, the death sentence inflicted on Protestants and Roman Catholics during the period. Roman Catholic priests and Protestant divines perished equally. The terrible fate of being burned at the stake, or perhaps, I'm sure worse, being hanged, drawn and quartered. The death penalty in Shakespeare's time for treason was butchery in public. And so it was a very real, very bloody business. A reminder that Queen Elizabeth I herself had been excommunicated in 1570. And so the elision between religious threat and treason was very clear in the culture. Just up the road from Shakespeare's home in Stratford-upon-Avon, in a little village called Idlicott, a Roman Catholic priest, Hugh Hall, was arrested in 1583 because of his involvement with the Somerville plot, which was a plot to try and kill Elizabeth I. And he was convicted. When Shakespeare purchased the largest house in the centre of Stratford-upon-Avon in 1597, the conveyancing around that house involved the son of the man from whom he was buying the house murdering his father, and the son being convicted and hanged in nearby Warwick. So it's just very, very prevalent in the culture of his time. Now on the screen, you've got the most succinct death sentence, I suppose, in all of literature, more or less. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 words, one line of verse shared between two people, King John and his servant Hubert. And it's all subtext. They're talking about Prince Arthur. Death, my lord, a grave, he shall not live, enough. And that's Prince Arthur's death sentence from his uncle, King John. In The Comedy of Errors, which was performed, the earliest recorded performance of this is before Lawyers at Gray's Inn on the 28th of December, 1594. The story of the play, but it's based on Plautus's Menechmi, the Roman comedy. The story of the play is about a man who's sentenced to death at the beginning, Aegean, and he's sentenced by the Duke of Ephesus. If any born at Ephesus be seen at any Syracusan marts and fairs, again, if any Syracusan born come to the bay of Ephesus, he dies. His goods confiscate to the Duke's dispose, unless 1,000 marks be levied to quit the penalty and to ransom him. Thy substance, valued at the highest rate, cannot amount unto 100 marks. Therefore, by law, thou art condemned to die. And for the rest of the play, we, the audience, know that because it takes place in a single day, and Aegean has a day to try and obtain his ransom money. As we head towards the end of the play, we realize that actually what we're heading towards all the way through is a family reunion. Aegean goes on to tell the Duke the story of how he came to Ephesus from Syracuse and why he's there, and the terrible story of his family being separated 30 years ago. And gradually, of course, that family, which involves a set of identical twins and their servants, another set of identical twins and a lost mother, they're all in Ephesus on the same day with Aegean. And miraculously, through Shakespeare's careful plotting, they come to reunion. But Aegean thinks he's still going to be executed towards the end, and gradually that burden is lifted from him as he realizes his family is is appearing around him. He's found his long lost son. There's another one, the other twins over there. So this speech is depicting somebody who thinks he's sentenced to death and then realizes there's hope. Though now this grained face of mine be hid in sap-consuming winter's drizzled snow, and all the conduits of my blood froze up, yet hath my night of life some memory, my wasting lamps some fading glimmer left, my dull deaf ears a little used to hear all these old witnesses. I cannot err. Tell me thou art my son, Antipholus. And a few lines later, when the family is reunited, the Duke himself is so moved at the reunion, as are we, the audience, that he pardons Aegeon entirely, even though he said at the beginning, we may pity but not pardon thee. At the end, he both pities and pardons Aegeon. No ransom is necessary, although it's offered. It's just clemency, which is given at the end of the Comedy of Errors. History play, and we might be wondering, is Shakespeare pro or against the death penalty? When he's depicting history, he presents himself as being pro it because he is telling the story of actual death penalties inflicted on historical figures. For example, Lord Scroop, the Earl of Cambridge, and Sir Thomas Grey in Henry V. Henry knows they're traitors. The chorus has just been on stage at the beginning of Act 2 to tell us we're going to see the arrest of 3 traitors and their conviction for high treason. And we watch it unfolding. And Henry tests them, and he says to his uncle Exeter, enlarge the man we committed yesterday that railed against our person. We consider it was excess of wine that set him on, and on his more advice we pardon him. Scroop, that's mercy, but too much security. Let him be punished, sovereign, lest example breed by his sufferance more of such a kind. Oh, says the king, let us be merciful. So may your highness, and yet punish too. Sir, you show great mercy if you give him life, after the taste of much correction. So the 3 traitors are depicted as themselves unforgiving of the man to whom the king wants to show mercy. Henry then presents the 3 men on stage with their death warrants as letters, and they open them, and we, the audience, are able to see their reactions to them reading their own death warrants in the presence of the monarch. And there's a long speech, which I've just extracted a few lines from, when Henry is expressing his disgrace at their treason and how they will suffer for it. But look at the language he uses. The mercy that was quick in us of late by your counsel is suppressed and killed. You must not dare for shame to talk of mercy. For your own reasons turn into your bosoms as dogs upon their masters, worrying you. See you, my princes and my noble peers, these English monsters. And to Lord Scroop, he speaks very significantly, I will weep for thee, for this revolt of thine methinks is like another fall of man. The terror of what they've tried to enact against his person is like another fall of Adam, an original sin being committed. Their faults are open, arrest them to the answer of the law, and God acquit them of their practices. That's the ultimate justification in law, I suppose, for the death penalty, that we've done all we can to cope with this person on earth. Now it's over to God as the judge to acquit them of their practices. A tragedy, King Lear. We see King Lear and his youngest daughter, Princess Cordelia, being arrested to be taken off to be executed. They're going off to prison, as far as they know, but it will be a condemned cell, which we learn just after they've left the stage. But this is how King Lear is imagining his life in prison with his daughter. No, 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 come, let's away to prison. We two alone will sing like birds in the cage. And when thou dost ask me blessing, I'll kneel down and ask of thee forgiveness. So we'll live and pray and sing and tell old tales and laugh at gilded butterflies and hear poor rogues talk of court news, and we'll talk with them too, who loses and who wins, who's in, who's out, and take upon us the mystery of things as if we were God's spies, and will wear out in a walled prison packs and sects of great ones that ebb and flow by the moon. Edmund, take them away. And as soon as they've left the stage, we learn that they're going to be executed in prison. And then there's another episode involving Edmund, who himself is mortally wounded by his half-brother Edgar. And as he's dying, he says, I pant for life, some good I mean to do, despite of mine own nature. Quickly send, be brief in it, to the castle, for my writ is on the life of Lear and on Cordelia. Nay, send in time. And Edmund is borne off, and it's all too late, because Cordelia has already been executed in prison, and the king re-enters carrying his dead daughter in his arms. The reaction of a parent who's seen their favorite child hanged, howl, 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 howl. It's beyond language. And of course, a stage picture of a father carrying a daughter is like an inverse Pietà of Mary holding the dead Jesus, himself executed in public. I saw this play performed with a woman playing Queen Lear, and it was a reverse gender production. So it was a story of 3 sons, not 3 daughters. And of course, when the mother came on carrying the youngest son who died in this adaptation, it was by the Theatricum Botanicum in the Topanga Canyon in California. This was in 2014. It was a Pietà. It was a mother with holding a dead son. And so the last sequence of that play is Lear reacting to the dead body of his favorite child. Cordelia, had I your tongues and eyes, I'd use them so that heaven's vault should crack. She's gone forever. I've got 2 more examples I want to tell you about before I hand back to John, because we've not come to the centerpiece for Shakespeare in terms of the death penalty. I'm saving that one till the end. But I want to notice All is True, Henry VIII, which part of the dramatic texture is about the fall of great men, the Duke of Buckingham and then Cardinal Wolsey. And they both make speeches of admirable self-knowledge in light of their death sentence. Cardinal Wolsey, we see, rather like those 3 traitors in Henry V, being found out on stage. His theft of the king's money, the embezzlement of funds, the illegal liaison with the Pope has done for him. And he knows the only way out is that he's going to be convicted of treason and executed. And he utters this quite wonderful speech. So farewell to the little good you bear me. Farewell, a long farewell to all my greatness. This is the state of man. Today he puts forth the tender leaves of hopes. Tomorrow blossoms and bears his blushing honours thick upon him. The 3rd day comes a frost, a killing frost. And when he thinks, good easy man, full surely his greatness is a ripening, nips his root, and then he falls, as I do. I have ventured, like little wanton boys that swim on bladders, this many summers in a sea of glory, but far beyond my depth. My high-blown pride at length broke under me, and now has left me, weary and old with service, to the mercy of a rude stream that must forever hide me. Vain pomp and glory of this world, I hate ye. I feel my heart new opened. Oh, how wretched is that poor man that hangs on princes' favours. There is betwixt that smile we would aspire to, that sweet aspect of princes and their ruin, more pangs and fears than wars or women have. And when he falls, he falls like Lucifer, never to hope again. So the extreme fall of a man who had everything and played his cards very wrongly. And then Cromwell enters and stands amazed at seeing Cardinal Wolsey. I have no power to speak, sir. What, amazed at my misfortunes? Can thy spirit wonder a great man should decline? Nay, and you weep. I am fallen indeed. How does your grace? Why? Well, never so truly happy, my good Cromwell. I know myself now, and I feel within me a peace above all earthly dignities, a still and quiet conscience. The king has cured me. I humbly thank his grace, and from these shoulders, these ruined pillars out of pity taken, a load would sink a navy, too much honour. Oh, 'tis a burden, Cromwell, 'tis a burden too heavy for a man that hopes for heaven. These are incredibly gracious speeches which Shakespeare and his collaborator John Fletcher are putting into the mouth of the imagined mouth of Cardinal Wolsey. But they're speeches of somebody who's like fully accepting his sentence and punishment and realizing something else about himself, a deeper knowledge of himself as he does so. Now, converse to that, to finish with, we come to the centerpiece of Shakespeare's canon in terms of the death penalty. Although it plays a prominent part in at least 18 of the plays, the most prominent part it plays in any play is in his astonishing Measure for Measure, in which the young Claudio is condemned to die simply for impregnating Juliet. And the deputy Duke, Angelo, is so strict and severe that he resurrects an old law for capital punishment for premarital sex. Shakespeare had stake in this because he had impregnated Anne Hathaway 3 months before they had to get married. So, you know, there's a little smack of Claudio, a little more than a smack of Shakespeare in Claudio, I'd say. And Isabella, Claudio's sister, goes to plead to Angelo for Claudio's life. And Angelo, strict, severe Angelo, is stirred with lust and longing for Isabella, and eventually agrees with her that the life of her brother will be spared if Isabella allows Angelo, to rape her. So she goes to see Claudio to tell him that he must be prepared to die because there's no way of his life being saved. And Shakespeare depicts, before Isabella enters, a friar who is the real Duke in disguise as a friar, watching what Angelo is making of his state while he slips away from his people, disguises himself as a friar, and he visits Angelo's condemned cell. So this is like a bit like a Lifelines visitor speaking to a condemned man. And I'm thinking especially of, we heard about poor Andrew Lee Jones and the foundation of Amicus itself. And the friar's role, he gives a 41 line speech, which was too big to put on the screen. I'm not going to read it to you, but it's the beginning of Act 3, Scene 1. And it begins, be absolute for death. And the friar, as a pastoral visitor to prepare a condemned man for his fate, gives several reasons why. You think you're alive now? Your life at the moment is not happy, nor has it ever been happy because of what life is. And it's a contra-life speech. And he says, for example, you're prey to all diseases. You're neither rich nor poor. You're neither young nor old, because when you're young, you're going to become old and die. When you're old, you're regretting that you're not young anymore. You don't really own anything because you're going to give it all up when you die anyway. So you're not happy. And that which you do own, you've forgotten about. So it's this sort of reasoning. At the end of the speech, Claudio says, the condemned man, I humbly thank you To sue to live, I find I seek to die. And seeking death, find life. Let it come on. And then there's an interruption because Isabella arrives and she enters and she gives him the complete reverse, the possible hope of life after having just been absolute for death. And there's a great dialogue between brother and sister in which Shakespeare articulates the fear of death, the fear of the condemned person. I don't want to die, I don't want to give up life. And Claudio says to his sister, aye, but to die, and to go we know not where, to lie in cold obstruction and to rot, this sensible warm motion to become a kneaded clod, and the delighted spirit to bathe in fiery floods, or to reside in thrilling region of thick-ribbed ice, to be imprisoned in the viewless winds and blown with restless violence round about the pendant world, or to be worse than worst of those that lawless and uncertain thought imagine howling, 'tis too horrible, the weariest and most loathed worldly life that age, ache, penury, and imprisonment can lay on nature is a paradise to what we fear of death. Later in the play, we go into the prison and we see other condemned men, including one Barnardine, who's been condemned for a very long time. This is Shakespeare's prisoner on death row. And a makeshift executioner, Pompey, says to him, Master Barnardine, you must rise and be hanged. Master Barnardine. And Barnardine, after a bit of dialogue saying he's drunk, he hasn't slept very well, he's got to continue sleeping, says, I swear I will not die today for any man's persuasion. And the Duke in disguise, also visiting the prison, says, but hear you, not a word. If you have anything to say to me, says the condemned man, come to my ward. From thence will I not die today. And he just leaves the stage. He's not going to be executed. He just walks off. And the Duke's left saying, well, unfit to live or die. A gravel heart after him, fellows. Bring him to the block. Well, he's not brought to the block because the thought was that they would use Barnardine's head to pretend it's Claudio's head to satisfy Angelo, who, although he's had sex with Isabella, but not really, she's tricked him, he's had sex with somebody else, still wants Claudio's head and still wants him executed. Someone dies of natural causes, Ragozine a pirate. He looks a little like Claudio. It becomes a farce around the death penalty and who's perishing and who's not. And Barnardine survives. And when the Duke comes back to put things to right and to condemn Angelo for behaving so appallingly in his absence and looking after the estate terribly, Barnardine is given mercy by the Duke. And Claudio is not executed, although although the Duke tells Isabella that her brother has perished. So it's an extremely central point of the narrative, the threat and the escape of the death sentence in Measure for Measure. And I'm going to stop there because I'm sure our distinguished audience have got questions. And I know John's got things he wants to ask Louis and me. So thank you very much for listening so carefully.
Thank you very much, Paul. And such wonderful presentations from both yourself and Louis as well. Thank you. I'm just going to put I did a different thing, but I'm going to not do that. I'm going to be very, very quick. So I'd like the audience to have their time to ask questions as well. So I'll pose one question to Louis and then one question to Paul. Louis, I was really struck and fascinated by your observation and your focus on what you termed civic emotion when you looked at all of the different depictions and the art that you provided. Is there a difference in your mind when we think of the death penalty and perhaps how we try to encourage people to see the brutality of the death penalty? Because of course, as you know, since the 19th century, the death penalty has more and more, definitely in the Western world, been brought behind prison walls. So we see this importance of art, reminding of brutality. How important do you think the use of art is today and with regards to this civic emotion, for us to keep reminding ourselves of how brutal the death penalty is, and therefore to be an argument for the abolition of the death penalty?
Well, emotions. It is sympathical that emotions and a very modern scientific approach to our problem. Without unity in the approach, one speak from the navigation of feelings, no? But it's for me clear that the two most important things in relation to the abolition of the death penalty are two. First one, the knowledge of the innocent that are executed. We know how many innocents was saved in the death row in the USA after the discovering of DNA. We don't know how many before. Other, we take much attention to the people in death row in USA, but we don't have so big attention upon the prisoners that are condemned to long prison sentences. 30 years, 40 years is, and is also, or there is also many errors. And for me, it's very interesting, this institution in Great Britain, in United Kingdom, for the correction of the wrong sentences. That's it. I think that is very important. But when somebody heard as first time about the innocents, that is very impressive, almost so impressive as the recitation from Paul Edmondson. No? That's man sieht the King Lear in our near place. No? The second one are the impressions, also the impression of our mind, of our scenes, the impression, not only the impression of our engraver, the impression of the engraver of our soul. No? And I think that the films keep much for that, films. No? For example, I recommend this book from Brian Stevenson that led to a film from in the pandemic time, was ambition lost, but it's a very important book to discover, to make growing the emotion against the racism, the errors, and so on. No? Films are also, but also photography. I forgot to put there, because I put many things, not only from Goya, and I don't arrive to the photography. There is a very important photography, one of the first ones, the first condemned to death in USA. They were one of the assassins, the murder of Lincoln. No? The photography is also it's more difficult because the photograph should be there. But I confess that I should put a reference also to Sofia Moro and his book, Who Deserved to Die? Who Deserves Die? Who is to arrive to him also through the website from Academics for Abolition. Where is also this book, my old book about Goya. So I can't speak too much. Sure.
Great. Thank you very much, Louise. Paul, thank you very much for your illuminating presentation. Wonderful.
You're very welcome.
Can I pick up on a comment you made about Shakespeare's style? So when he's reviewing the monarch or the duke or the king's use of the death penalty in the history plays, you're saying he's not making an observation for or against, but just that it's the fact that monarchs do put people to death. And then you ended with a wonderful presentation on Measure for Measure, and you kind of seem to be saying that it's a different approach, or maybe Shakespeare wants us to take away different things from how he depicts the engagement in the death penalty. In thinking about those styles, what do you think about Shakespeare's position on the death penalty would be, in your opinion?
I think he'd always grant clemency. I think he's on the side of life, and I think we see it writ large in Measure for Measure and in King Lear, because of the pity that we feel for Lear and the dead Cordelia, for the regret that we feel that, you know, Edmund, the evil Edmund, his intervention does not work. She's not saved, but the innocent perish. And Measure for Measure, when Isabella comes in at the end of that, the absolute vedette speech from the disguised Duke, it's the interruption of hope. But when he's dealing with historical sources, he can't. I think he emphasizes, perhaps in Henry V, Henry's, as it were, heroism in the way he treats the three traitors. That he's enacting justice in sentencing them to death. And by the way, it's like a second fall of Adam. It's like, you know, another fall of man, and that's part of the attention which can, you know, elevate the historical account on Shakespeare's part. But even those Cardinal Wolsey speeches, you know, are lyrical and extremely powerful and beautiful. But here's a man being taken off to be convicted ultimately, and then to perish.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Paul. Margot, I see that time is getting ahead of us. Can I hand it over to you, or to Honor, I think, who is going to look at the chat room questions, and then we can put the audience.
Great. I've got one lined up that is from Eliza. I'm just going to let Eliza ask her own question. That should work now, Eliza.
Hi.
Sorry, Elise.
Paul, that was really fascinating, especially because I studied Shakespeare at Warwick about nearly 10 years ago now. So it's really merged two things that I'm really interested in. And off the back of what John was just asking you, I wanted to ask whether you think that if Shakespeare, you know, advocates clemency, do you think that he was using his plays as a vehicle for political commentary about the death penalty? And if so, how dangerous would that have been in a society that, you know, was putting so many people to death?
That's a really good question, Eliza. Thank you. I think on the whole, Shakespeare is not doing what you ask, or what you perhaps are interested he might be doing. The best example I can give of death penalty in Shakespeare being really politically edged is in King John. And that's because it seems to me pretty clear that there are parallels to be made between King John sentencing his cousin Arthur to death, and Elizabeth I sentencing her cousin Mary Queen of Scots to death. And in fact, in the play, although one can identify these parallels if you go looking for them, Arthur dies accidentally. He escapes prison and falls off the prison walls and perishes as a result of it. But the seesawing of John, please, you know, I really want him dead. Oh, pardon him, because I've got to go the other way now and win popularity. It's a very, you know, politically sensitive portrayal, I think, that Shakespeare is giving us.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lisa. Okay, I think we have another one lined up that's having a few mic problems, so I might have to do that one myself. Hang on 1 second. Let's see if I can get that. Actually, Tara, maybe.
I just
Maybe.
want to
Yes, go on.
Lewis has put in the chat the link to his book on Goya. I see that Lewis put his book on.
Perfect. Thank you so much for that. It's great. Can we allow, sorry, my talking not permitted. Hang on.
Hi, can you hear me?
Oh yeah, brilliant. Thank you.
Okay,
Yes, brilliant. Thanks.
ask if you believe that contemporary art has the same impact as historic art on our understanding of the death penalty.
Thank you.
That one's for you, Lewis.
Yeah.
Do you think that historic art, that contemporary art has the same impact, or to what extent does it have equal impact or more or less than historical art on our understanding of the death penalty?
I think that for the modern arts, it's very difficult to express these details that related to cruelty. It is not impossible. Huh? For example, there is modern art very, very impressive from German, from the 30 years against war. About the war is more easy to represent the reaction against it. Otto Dix is the name of probably likely the most important painter or drowner against war. But death penalty is something very concrete. You have seen in Goya the last details, how I said in my intervention that each country should find his way to death execution. But United Kingdom is remain in the orca, in the gallows,
hanging in the gallows.
In the hanging, and what had made the people in United Kingdom make a very deep specialization from the hanger. that how do you call the who?
Hangman.
Oh,
the hangman.
The hangman. The hangman that appeared in Nuremberg was very proud that he was the best hanger in the history of United Kingdom because had a very particular technique. Each country find his way, and it's not so easy with the modern art to represent these things. I think, in my experience, maybe I am only ignorant, but I look always for images that relation with death penalty, and in modern art, I don't find it. And what I find, one time I lose the image after that. It was also a German from the 30s, Hans Gross. In his drawing, man can see somebody that hang in the middle of the street while the people go without pay much attention. But this is something very aislado, no? Isolated. Can my German come fluently, but it's not useful for our session.
That's okay, Lewis. You're speaking your fourth language. Preston, Tara, could I just come back to Tara? Are you familiar with any modern art that you feel has been particularly cogent in reflecting the aesthetics of the death penalty?
I wouldn't say so. I mean, if we're talking broader art forms, then I feel like the death penalty has kind of been reflected more in film nowadays. But in terms of, you know, artwork, classic pieces and paintings and things, nothing that I'm familiar with.
Yeah, excellent. So your thoughts are consistent with what Lewis has just said.
Yeah, definitely.
Thank you.
I am thinking about, we have today the war in Ukraine, no? And the genocide that which is made there. No? Now we can see the photographies, the photos. We can see the films. We need maybe a drawing and something like that. Also, art, other modern art can transmit also this our reaction against this cruelty. I think that maybe our group, the Academics for Abolition, could organize a the convocation for for images from modern art against the death penalty. Maybe we find that in USA, because naturally they have all. For example, there is things that can be explained only descriptive or from our cruelty point of view. For example, the last meals. I have seen that there is the curiosities about also approach that put in relevance the cruelty of the death, no? The death in cold blood. That is what characterized the death penalty, is death through cold blood.
Excellent. Thank you, Lewis. Margot, is there any further questions?
We have another, if that's okay. Have we got time to just do a quick?
Yeah, we've got 5 minutes.
Okay, Patsy. Oh, Patsy, do you want to ask your question? Are you able to? Okay, I'll ask her question for her because I think she's having some problems. Do you think that the gravity of death row experience can truly be conveyed through the medium of art?
Well, it depends what you mean by art, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, Louis immediately thinks of painting. I might think of poetry. I might think of drama. There's also biography. And I want to tell you about this book. I don't know if you know about this book, by René Weiss, Professor René Weiss, who's a Shakespeare scholar and biographer and writer, very talented, wonderful writer. And he became fascinated with Edith Thompson, who was hanged on the 9th of January, 1923 for a crime she did not commit, age 30. And she was implicated in the crime and found guilty as an accomplice because she was having an affair with the murderer of Freddie Bywaters. And René Weiss looks at all the court transcriptions and brings Edith to life in this book. And you know from the outset that she's going to perish when you're reading the biography, but it's an amazing book for the way she just becomes so vividly alive, and the trajectory of the book, you know she's going to perish. And René has made it his life's focus, one of his life's focus, to get her posthumous pardon from our state. And he's not succeeded in that yet. But 4 years ago, he did succeed in having her exhumed and reburied in her parents' grave in the City of London cemetery. And this is where Shakespeare and the Death Penalty connect up, because René also produced this marvelous biography of Shakespeare, which is dedicated to Edith Graydon, who became Edith Thompson. She's the dedicatee of the Shakespeare biography. Astonishing. So I thought you'd like to know about that.
That's remarkable, Paul, because the famous hangman, which I think Lewis is referring to earlier, is Alfred Pierpont. And in his evidence to the Royal Commission on Capital Punishment in 1950, he goes almost to state that the one that he regrets hanging is Edith. And he talks about how when she when she was led to the gallows, basically how her body just gives away, and they had to carry her to the gallows. It's awful. Well, it's just a very traumatic.
And also there's evidence that the Home Secretary himself wanted to pardon her and chickened out.
That's
but
right.
I think there were 1 million signatories against her sentencing. You know, which for 1923 took some doing. So we didn't. This was, you know, massively pre social media.
Yeah. I mean, from my perspective about the question, I think what I love about the arts is that it's a holistic way to review the brutality of the death penalty. And you can take many things from different aspects, from paintings, from theatre, from photography, from films, from music, and from drama as well. Dramatical depictions of trauma of the body. And I think it's about art today keeping pace with the abolitionist movement worldwide, and about art in all parts of the world where retention is still there, where governments still impose executions, but artists in all form to keep making sure that in our consciousness there is an understanding of the inhumanity of the death penalty. So my answer would be is that we need to ensure and enrich and support the arts when they are looking at human rights violations and helping us to keep behind the veil of what governments do to individuals.
Excellent. Thank you, John. Lewis, did you want to add anything to that?
Maybe to remember to John York that the second reason or the second circumstance that make big impression to the people is not only the innocence, but also to know where that here in the near from our university, near from our domicile, was executed the death penalty. That is what I call geography of the cruelty. And we have, I am preparing the second volume, but we can look for some places of execution. That is what I mean when I speak about cruelty. There is too many places in London for execution. Well, we should look for that, because that is very important, and that is something that transmits the emotion, and the people that suddenly knows that there was the place where the people were hanging, or the people lose the hair. That this is important. That is as task for the near future. John?
Yeah, no, we are going to talk about that, Lewis, yes.
And I will ask Paul about this text. By that will help me to read Shakespeare in this summer holidays.
Thank you, Louis.
Can I just say thank you so much to Lewis and to Paul and to Margot for a really enriching first session of our discussions. Thank you so much, everybody. Margot, do you want to wrap up and say anything?
Thank you all. Yes, I want to just echo that. So thank you very much, Paul. Thank you, Liz. Thank you, John. We look forward, John, to the next session in a couple of days' time on Thursday.
Yes, in 2 days' time. And we need to thank Paul publicly here to keep it on record. It's on video, because unfortunately, one of our panelists, Dr. Anna Nazir, is poorly, and so we've had a wonderful invitation, haven't we, Paul?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
As a standby, yes.
Yeah, yes, Paul. So sorry, I was wondering if you wanted just to quickly say.
Oh, John said that we needed a speaker to talk on Shakespeare and God and the death penalty. And so I thought, well, yes, I could probably help find somebody. So I'm delighted to tell you that the Dean of Coventry Cathedral is going to be speaking on Thursday evening, the Venerable John Whitcomb. And it's especially appropriate because Coventry Cathedral, as it were, the cathedral is part of the conversation, and it's a site of reconciliation. That's what Coventry Cathedral stands for, built out of the ruins of the old cathedral. So I'm thrilled that the Dean of Coventry can take part on Thursday.
That is wonderful news. Wonderful news. Thank you.
Yeah, and I just want to say it's wonderful that the Dean of Coventry will be joining the ambassador of Argentina to the Republic of Italy, Roberto Carles, and he's a very good friend of Lewis's, and he's sharing his thoughts on some of the personal audiences that him and Lewis actually has had with the Pope, and so he's going to be sharing some of the perspectives from the Catholic canon. And so, of course, the Dean of Coventry as well will be talking about that as well, and the Anglican canon. So it's wonderful that we're going to have that on Thursday evening from 6 till 7:30. So we look forward to you joining us.
So we'll see you all then. And again, thank you to everybody. Keep the conversation going on Twitter and social media. Feel free if you have further questions. I know that we didn't get to all the questions, but do feel free to email and contact us directly, and we can get back to you all on various issues. So thank you everybody for taking part. Thanks for the questions. Thank you so much for our honoured speakers. We are truly very grateful to have had this wonderful evening. Thank you all.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you, Margaret.
Thank you so much.